I was already halfway into tomorrow when it happened. You know that autopilot you slide into after a long day where your brain is just checking boxes. Set the 7 a.m. alarm pack, my kid's lunch tightened the briefing for noon. Then I turned into Fairgrove Estates, and there he was in my driveway, reflective vest catching my headlights, pistol on his hip, arms crossed like he owned the concrete I pay for. And the night went quiet in that way where you can hear your own pulse and the neighborhood breathing through its windows. I cracked my window and kept my voice even, the way years of training etch into your bones. Evening, can I help you? And the guy in the vest. Douglas Brinton, HOA safety chair. If you believe a laminated badge and a folding table make you law. He squinted at me like he was grading a test I didn't study for. You live here, he said, flat suspicious. Certain, and I said yes. Unit 314 while my thumb hovered over the garage clicker, because sometimes proof needs to be louder than patience. The door rumbled up, motion light splashed that bland yellow honesty on my empty garage. The ladder, the dusty storage bins, and still he didn't move, just tapped the grip of his gun like it was a nervous habit. He wanted everyone to notice residents only, he said. We keep track around here, and trust me, I've met cartel lieutenants with steadier hands and better judgment, but none of them lived 3 doors down from a maple tree I picked because it looked like peace. I felt the neighborhood wake up around us, curtains lifting, porch lights popping on like runway markers, phones coming up at the edges of my sight, because in 2025 everybody's a witness and a cameraman, and the air got thinner when he tugged the pistol halfway out and said, "You're gonna need more than words," like he'd practiced that line in the mirror, and I heard a neighbor whisper, "He's got a gun on her," and all I could think was, breathe. Stay still, keep the moment on rails, because panic is a hand you cannot take back. I told him calm but clear, "You're pointing a weapon at a homeowner that's reckless. That's illegal, lower it now." And he smiled. Like control tastes sweet. People like you don't just slide into a place like this without anyone noticing. I'm the safety chair, and maybe you've heard that kind of sentence before. The one where safety is a costume fear wears when it wants applause, you know what I mean? And somewhere between the dog barking twice and the engines idling on the cross street, I felt the line snap. He brought the gun all the way out, 2 hands, stance, sloppy trigger finger floating, where no trained person lets it float. And for a heartbeat, I saw the barrel drift toward a neighboring porch when he snapped at someone who called his name. And I said, "Eyes on me, Douglas. You just flagged half this block. I've trained men half your age to keep their composure under fire, and you are not composed." He didn't like that bullies rarely like mirrors, so he squared up deeper and tried to sell me the story, where he's the protector and I'm the trespasser. And I let the silence sit on him for a second, before I said, "What training do you have? Who certified you? Who taught you how to de-escalate?" Because those questions cut through costume, and his answer was the kind that makes my jaw tighten. "I don't need training to spot trouble." And he was looking right at me when he said, "Trouble." Here's the part people get wrong about moments like this. They think the badge is the magic trick. Flip it open, problem solved, roll credits. It's not. The badge is just a fact. Judgment is the tool, so I told him slowly, "I'm going to show you something." My hands stayed high and visible, and I lifted my credentials in the wash of the streetlights, so every porch could read the gold. Special Agent Simone Kearns, FBI Tactical Command. I live here. You're aiming at your neighbor and a federal officer, and you could feel the block inhale little "oh my gods" and "holy." Well, you can fill in the rest. And for a second I thought that would be the off-ramp. Pride would swallow gun, would lower everyone, would go to bed with a complicated story and a quiet ending. It didn't. Pride hates quiet endings. Pride needs an audience, and Douglas had one, so he tried to talk louder than the truth. "This is my neighborhood. The badge doesn't mean you belong," and sweat gathered at his temple. while his hands shook in a way cameras do not forgive. And then right on cue, like a movie that knows pacing, sirens laced the night and painted the glass red and blue to squad cars, boxing the cul-de-sac doors open. Commands clean and clipped. "Drop the weapon, sir." "Drop it now," and he turned a fraction toward them, with the pistol still in his hands, and the whole block exhaled, "No," and I stepped my voice over the noise. FBI resident armed male is HOA chair, Douglas Brinton, threatening me with a firearm for several minutes, and the officers took it in fast, eyes on the badge, eyes on his muzzle. You could feel the math shifting under everyone's feet. I wish I could tell you he dropped it, because he realized he was wrong. But the truth is less cinematic and more human. He dropped it, because there were too many witnesses, and the word federal was heavier than he expected. And fear outvoted ego. For one hard second, the gun clattered like a gavel, cuffs clicked, and he shouted the way people shout when they've run out of evidence. "She doesn't belong here. You're making a mistake." And I let the adrenaline bleed out, slow, breath by breath, while a sergeant took my statement, and another officer collected phones like modern affidavits, and we all stood in the wash of what didn't happen. If stories ended there, America would sleep more. But we are very good at extra innings, so 2 days later, I found myself in a folding chair at an emergency HOA meeting, smelling like disinfectant and bad coffee, the room over capacity, and underprepared the board, trying to look like authority instead of volunteerism. In cardigans, and the first guy to stand was someone who loved the idea of Douglas more than the safety of his neighbors. He said he was protecting us. He was the only one who cared enough to patrol, and from the other side of the room, a woman's voice cut clean. He pointed a gun at a woman in her own driveway. "That is not protection. That is a tantrum with bullets." And yeah, that landed people clapped and booed in equal measure, because nothing divides a block faster than a mirror. The chairwoman asked me to speak, and I kept it simple, because simple is hard to twist. I moved here for quiet, and for my daughter to ride her bike without a plan for where to hide. Tuesday night, a man with no training decided I didn't belong, and pulled a gun to make the point. I stayed calm. I used my voice. That is why we are not at a funeral. And some guy in the back tried the badge line, easy to say when you've got credentials, and I told him the badge didn't steady his hands. Composure did, witnesses did, cameras did. And if your idea of safety only works when the other person has my resume, then it's not safety, it's luck. The board voted to remove Douglas from any safety role, to ban armed private patrols, to contract licensed security on weekends, and host de-escalation workshops with the local police. And it wasn't unanimous, because pride doesn't retire without a fight. But it was decisive. And afterward, the line of neighbors became a confessional. "I'm sorry, you went through that. He meant well. My son saw the video and cried. We should have said something sooner. Can I bring you anything?" Sometimes grief looks like muffins and awkward eye contact. At home, my daughter asked the question teenagers ask when the world doesn't pass the sniff test. "Why would he do that? We live here." And I told her something I wish wasn't true. Some people decide who belongs based on a picture in their head, and when real life doesn't match the picture, they try to force it to fit, and the only way that doesn't turn dangerous is if judgment shows up, restraint shows up, voice shows up before anything else does, you know what I mean? And she said that's dumb, which is teenage for honest, and we put the HOA letter on the fridge next to a magnet from a beach. We don't visit enough, and called it a win that didn't feel like victory so much as relief. In the days after the clips made their rounds, because that's our era outrage and think pieces and people who love to minimize danger by calling it a misunderstanding. But I wasn't chasing headlines, I was chasing a peace. I moved here to buy with my mortgage and my patience. And if you ask me for the thesis of the night, it's not complicated. Fear pulls a gun, judgment decides not to fear, is loud and dramatic, and begs for witnesses. Judgment is quiet and steady and saves lives without applause. And that's the truth. I want living in the same cul-de-sac as my kid. So tell me where you land. Was Douglas protecting anyone or protecting an idea of himself? Have you ever watched bias put on a uniform and call itself safety? What would you have done if that gun swung past your porch? If you were me, drop a comment and don't hold back if you believe real safety looks like trust and accountability. And knowing when to stand down. Hit subscribe and share this story, not for the drama. For the day your own neighborhood is a test and your voice has to carry.